My name is Phil Kilbridge. I'm NatureBridge's CEO, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's Campfire Chat with Ian Yalas and Kristine McDivitt Tompkins. I'd like to share a couple of housekeeping items to make this event run smoothly for everyone. Chat is going to be enabled for tonight's event, so you can use that at the bottom of the screen. We are also recording this event, and the full recording will be available on the NatureBridge website about 48 hours afterwards. We're going to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, which allows you to ask questions and to upvote questions for Kris. If you see a question that's similar to one that you want to ask, please give it a thumbs up. Again, we are using the chat function, and we've started by asking people to type in where they are zooming in from tonight and what is their dream travel destination. On behalf of NatureBridge, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. This fall, we have been beyond pleased to welcome kids back to their national park classrooms to learn and explore outdoors with their friends. Over the last 50 years, we've been taking that for granted, but now with this pandemic, we have to celebrate every victory we get, every busload that needs to and gets the chance to come to our Yosemite campus, every group of students that hikes together at Olympic National Park, everyone that explores Rodeo Beach or Prince William Forest Park. We need to celebrate that opportunity for children to discover and learn together. Over the last 50 years, over 1.5 million kids have participated in our program, and the legacy continues today. I do want to take a moment to thank our 50th anniversary sponsors. Now, celebrating a 50-year legacy during a pandemic where you can't gather in person has indeed been challenging, but we found ways to tell our stories and stay connected to our supporters through things like these campfire chats. Our donors, especially our 50th anniversary sponsors, all listed here, were instrumental in our ability to be resilient. These 41 businesses, foundations, and individuals have contributed almost $500,000 to our 50th anniversary. I'd like to thank our donors at $25,000 and above this evening. NatureBridge's founder, he founded the Yosemite Institute back in 1971, Don Reese and his family. Our incoming board chair, Susan Bourne King, and her husband, Steve King. Ann Baxter, the Marin Community Foundation, Alaska Airlines, Yosemite Conservancy, Bank of the West, Oracle, and Insight Editions. To each of you and beyond, your support helps make the 50 years upcoming possible for NatureBridge and the students we serve. And without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce our host, Ian Yalas. Ian is chair of NatureBridge's board of directors. He's been a marketing executive at Nike and Patagonia, and before that, the executive director of Outward Bound Canada. He currently serves as a board member, advisor, and thought partner for a select group of early stage businesses and brands. Please join me in welcoming Ian Yalas. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate the introduction. I also want to echo your gratitude for our 50th anniversary sponsors and all of the donors that have supported NatureBridge over the arc of our 50 years. And also, I want to encourage anybody who's inspired by the conversation with Kris tonight and NatureBridge's mission to join me in making a year-end gift to support the ongoing work of this incredible organization. So as far as tonight is concerned, I am unbelievably excited on behalf of the entire NatureBridge community to introduce tonight's real guest, Kristine McDivitt Tompkins. Kris, as I think most people may know, is the former president and CEO of Patagonia, and also the co-founder of Tompkins Conservation. Over 25 years through the work of Tompkins Conservation and various nonprofit partners, and also in collaboration with governments and fellow philanthropists, Kris, alongside her late husband, Doug Tompkins, have worked tirelessly and courageously to protect wild beauty and biodiversity by creating a whole system of national parks, which we're going to learn more about. They've also restored wildlife to those national parks. They've inspired an immense amount of activism within Chile and Argentina. And they've also inspired a kind of economic vitality in the communities as a result of the conservation work that they've been doing right in the local communities. In 2017, Kris was the first conservationist to be awarded the prestigious Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy. And in 2018, she was named the United Nations Global Patron for Protected Areas. So Kris, I want to welcome you. Please join us. Turn on your video and unmute yourself. There she is.
Hello,
Kris,
everybody.
We're so excited to have you here with us.
Well, thank you.
I just want to connect a first dot between your story, which we're going to get into, and NatureBridge, and really explain why we're so excited to talk to you this evening. Our mission is to connect young people to the wonder and science of nature. And in doing so, we want to ignite self-discovery and inspire stewardship of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about that mission of NatureBridge, and I think about you, there is no doubt that if I scoured the planet, there probably wouldn't be anybody we could find that would embody that idea of being a steward for the planet in the way that you and your team and your work alongside Doug over the last 25 years have done. So I think there's a very direct, pragmatic, but also inspirational relationship between our nature and you and your work.
Thank you. That's a very kind series of things to say about us, and I hope we live up to those wonderful descriptions.
So here's what I want to do. I want to provide a little bit of context and just quickly a little bit of the backstory. And believe me, we could spend a lot of time on the backstory. So
That's fine.
Yeah, at the age of, I believe, 15, when you were still in high school, you started to work in the stock room at Chouinard Equipment, which was the predecessor company to the company we're all familiar with, which is Patagonia. And then after college, you went back to work with Yvon and Melinda Chouinard. I believe you were employee number 6 at Patagonia. And
Patagonia hadn't been created yet.
Okay, so it was still Chouinard Equipment, and then comes along
technical rock and ice climbing equipment then.
Okay, so you go from the stock room ultimately to become the CEO of Patagonia.
Yeah.
And I believe, by the way, you continue to this very day to serve on the board of Patagonia. And
that's right.
Melinda and Yvon have been close, dear friends and colleagues in the work you've done through Tompkins Conservation.
Yep.
So that's one part of the backstory. The other part of the backstory is your dear late husband, Doug Tompkins. And just by way of background, and you may want to fill in a little detail here, Kris, but Doug, first of all, was an extraordinary climber, paddler, extraordinary explorer, climbed all over the world, paddled incredible rivers, an incredibly passionate outdoors person. He was also the founder of the North Face, and interestingly, a lifelong friend and climbing companion of Yvon Chouinard's. And after the North Face, he was a co-founder of Esprit, the clothing company, which became a global, international, successful business. And along the way, I think Doug started to really reflect on his work, his life, and started to ask himself, I think, some real questions. And I think he said he came to the point where he realized perhaps he had climbed the wrong mountain. He'd become a titan of business, sort of representing success in every external sense of the word. He sold his part of Esprit and he moved to Chile. And the last little part of the backstory is that I think in the early 90s, through your work with Patagonia and your friendship with the Chouinards and their relationship with Doug, you met Doug. The two of you fell in love. You got married in '94, and you moved to Chile to partner with Doug on a very, very ambitious conservation-based effort. So that's the backstory. Do you want to, we could spend a lot of time there, but anything to add to that?
It's more or less the way it went. A few shifts on dates and so on, but basically by the end of '93, I retired from Patagonia and on a Friday and moved to South Chile to a roadless area on Sunday, a couple days later. But in those days, we didn't really start with this grand plan. You know, it's like most ideas. You have a vague idea of something that may be possible, and then it just starts evolving. It's pretty organic the way that we got started. There was no grand plan in the beginning.
So there was no, so that's curious. So, but what I do want to ask is, there wasn't necessarily a grand plan, but what was the point of inspiration, and what motivated you to begin work on what has now become an incredibly audacious, remarkable undertaking?
Well, I would say three things, although, you know, there are many, many reasons we take one road or one path over another one throughout our life. But I would say that we were both sick of being in business. You know, we'd worked nonstop for 25 years. And I wanted to do something else. I never worked anyplace else. I loved the company. I still love the company. But I was ready to do something else with my life. Certainly Doug was. And we were outdoor people. So we understood what was happening in the world. And Doug had spent time in Chile in the early 60s as training as a ski racer down there in the off season. And he was looking around for some place that he wanted to settle into and do some sort of conservation projects, but it wasn't completely clear at the time what we might do. And then we were able to acquire a couple large tracts of land in Chile. And that really set off the whole story. So I think you have some photographs here.
Yeah, so here's some of the images.
Very, very quickly. This is just to show everybody that we work in a lot of different kinds of landscapes. This is Patagonia. We work with the big cats of the Southern Cone, is rock and ice down into these wetlands. This is all Patagonia National Park. We donated that 3 years ago. 765,000 acres. So these are a few shots of that particular project. And it is one of the three sort of emblematic parks we created. This is one of the others. This is Iberá wetlands up in northeastern Argentina, where we're reintroducing the jaguars, and I think you're going to hear a little bit about that later. And this is on the coast. This is Pumalín. So just to give you a bird's eye view of the kind of territories that we've been involved in, and beauty. Doug and I really have thought for a very long time that we have moved away from beauty as a value, and going back to think about what is a life in the absence of beauty? What do we lose? And so much of what we do is driven by seeking out and trying to protect the jewels of a territory, of a nation, besides the biological importance and all of that, the sheer possibility of preserving beauty for all to come, all are welcome, is a
So I think those images, at least for me, are really helpful, because it's almost impossible to imagine and comprehend the scope and the scale and the diversity of the ecosystems and the extraordinary beauty that you have managed to protect over the course of the 25-year journey to date. And it amounts to just a few other data points for our audience here. You've created or expanded 15 national parks,
yes,
plus 2 marine national parks. That amounts to protecting about 14 million acres of land-based, conservation in Chile and Argentina. And my understanding is an additional 30 acres of marine-based ocean environments that have been protected. And I think it's also worth noting that there are roughly, over 75 communities that are benefiting from this conservation-based effort and parkland protection through tourism and sort of a nature-based economy, if you will. You've also initiated over 20 conservation-based projects, and you've begun a rewilding, a reintroduction of wildlife into these dramatic ecosystems, which we'll get to. But I want to ask you another question. If you think about the history of the environmental movement, and in fact, if you think about the history of major social movements, certainly in this country, I think it's always been the case that typically these movements and these efforts are rife with conflict. And over the arc of your journey, it seems pretty clear that there was tremendous opposition as you landed in Chile and set out to begin to sort of build out this ecosystem of connected places. There was huge pushback, as I understand it, but from major institutions representing the status quo, the Chilean government, the military, the Catholic Church, the huge resource extraction industry. So can you just talk a little bit about sort of the nature of that dynamic, but also I understand that has really been transformed, and the way you're viewed, the way your colleagues are viewed, and the way the work that you've done is viewed has totally transformed in a very positive way. Any commentary about that part of the story?
Well, I think certainly the highlight of being really vilified and death threats and the military flying low over our house, and our phones were tapped for 5 years, and a lot of intervention, police stationed around us and so on. That was really in the early 90s. And when you think about it, that's a solid generation ago. And so the way I looked at it then and the way I look at it now are completely different, because then we thought, oh, well, we knew we wanted to acquire these lands and give them back as national parks. But we were foreigners, huge tracts of land. We were known as the people who cut Chile in half. People thought we were developing a new Jewish state, even though we were raised as Anglicans, and an army base for the Argentine military, and so on and so forth. And now I see it that was impossible to avoid. You can't have these cultural, social changes without the obvious suspicion and even rejection of something that's taking place in the way that this was. Somebody sent me a book 2 or 3 years into this pretty dark period, and it was the history of the creation of Grand Teton National Park, which took 60 years and was a real gunslinging battle. And then we just didn't have any context. I think we were naive, of course. We learned a lot, but I think it was absolutely going to happen. I mean, there's that. And then there's the obvious conflict that wherever conservation is hatched, there's an equal and opposite push from the production side, the economic side. And that's going to happen everywhere in the world. And it has had in every project we've ever done, and the ones that we know around the world, it's an inherent conflict between economic and conservation goals. So just to go there for a minute, when I think of conservation, I think of conserving land and protecting land and ecosystems, and in your case, by the way, also bringing those ecosystems back to life and closer to their original natural state. But it seems like as you went along this journey, you also introduced the idea of these parks and these protected areas having the ability to reinvent local economies, and recognizing that there could be a healthy relationship between and partnership between conservation and tourism, for example. Can
Just talk a little bit about that and how that idea entered the picture.
Well, from the beginning, first of all, we were raised to be good neighbors. So there's this natural, almost inbred sense to be a good neighbor. And that wasn't always so easy to do because people mistrusted us. And again, we were foreigners. We spoke Spanish fluently, but poorly. So the early years were just that. They were the early years, and it was tough, really developing friendships that were durable. We had to prove to everybody that we were doing what we said we were doing. And once that happened, then the whole circumstance changed. I think you can't have conservation, I really don't care where it is, if you don't also simultaneously tie benefits to local communities, regional communities, to that conservation. I just don't see it. And it's slow sometimes, as I said, in the early years, it was kind of slow. But at the end of the day, local regional communities are the last line of defense if somebody wants to go in and decimate a national park or its status is challenged and so on and so forth. And we see this in the United States, we see it everywhere. If you went after Yellowstone today, West Yellowstone, Jackson, all these people would go berserk because, and then it's not just economics, it's that these parks become theirs. They have a sense of ownership, which is what anyone would hope for, that defends the beauty of the place, the wildlife of the place, the absolute sensibility that all are welcome. You walk through the gates of Yellowstone, I don't care who you are one of the owners of that park. And I think that we have never believed that you could have national parks or any kind of conservation in the absence of that authentic and durable relationship.
Well, I think, as you know, and NatureBridge operates in national park environments, places like Yosemite, Olympic National Park, Golden Gate National Park. And so we certainly hold both the concept and the ideal of national parks, as well as the pragmatic, reality of national park very close to our hearts. So another interesting, and you alluded to this earlier in talking about beauty, and how that's been a value that has sort of driven the vision. And that, the little bit that I know, has extended to the commitment you've made to build appropriate, both functionally but aesthetically, infrastructure within the various parks that you've created, with a very fine, sort of keen aesthetic eye. And I'm wondering if you can just comment on that. And I think we also have some images to share with our audience this evening of some of that infrastructure.
Well, it's always been important to us, one, that there is infrastructure, because a lot of countries, and Chile and Argentina are no different, they don't necessarily have the funds to build out infrastructure. So we build the infrastructure. We, as you'll see, changes in architectural style, because we want the architecture to speak to the local vernacular of design and so on. And we really believe that the way to get people to care about nature is to defend it and to identify with it, to defend it, to fall in love, to go hiking and be miserable, because those are the days you remember. You don't remember the days you went to work. You don't remember the days you go to school. You remember the time that you went out on a hike. It was longer than you thought. It was colder than you thought. You got wetter than you thought you would. And there's a little misery. So we have, you saw a couple of pictures of museums, and we work hard to turn the big parks anyway over as turnkey parks to the country. And this is the Patagonia National Park.
So I want to pick up on that. And there are a couple more questions I want to ask you, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So reminding people to put any questions you may have in the Q&A box. But so just to come back to what you just said. So often when I try to articulate the essence of what NatureBridge does when we take young people out into these magnificent national park settings, I'm fond of quoting a gentleman by the name of Baba Douine. He was a Senegalese forester and environmentalist. And he said, and I'm quoting, he said, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love, we'll only love what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." And the reason I think that embodies what we do at NatureBridge so precisely and eloquently is it encapsulates both the sort of intellectual as well as the emotional and psychological part of the impact of a NatureBridge experience on young people. So with that in mind, I'm curious, within the various parks and this incredible infrastructure that you've created, has there been any effort to develop educational programs, in particular for young people?
Oh yeah, the big parks have educational programs, not only educational, but outdoor programs, because I agree with the gentleman. I would just add that it's not just what you're taught, it's what you feel, it's what you experience. And that can be great experiences. It can also be kind of miserable. And so we believe in getting people outside and hiking and overnights and up into the snow, areas they would never have gone otherwise to visit. And so we do in-town education, but our specialty is really getting kids out with guides. And I don't know how many thousands of kids we have taken into parks, and I've gone on trips with them, 4-day trips and so on. It's really an inspiration. A lot of local people become guides, as I'm sure you're aware of. And I don't know, I think that's how he's right. You fall in love first. If you don't fall in love with something, you have no sense of responsibility to help save it, to help protect it. And that's what the world needs. We need to believe in peace between the human and non-human world, not just peace between human to human.
I couldn't agree more. So speaking of that, I think a more recent dimension of your work revolves around the concept of rewilding. So can you explain what that is and your work in that area? And I believe we also, in a minute, Corey, we can share a short video to bring it to life as well. But just what is that?
Rewilding is wherever you are, you stop and ask yourself, who's missing in the non-human world? What species are missing? Are they keystone species? And we decided about 15 years ago that wherever we work, we would ask this question: who is missing? And what's their role in the place? And then work to bring them back, which it sounded pretty lofty and not all that difficult when we started, but boy, is it exacting work. So we started with giant anteaters, tapirs, 13 different species we're working on right now in Chile and Argentina. And it's just, I can't imagine our work today in the absence of that. So it's half of what we do now, is bringing back species that have gone missing, in some cases for over 100 years.
So one of those species is the jaguar, and which was recently reintroduced into is it the Iberra Park? Iberra, and that's a keystone species.
Yes, it is. It is the keystone species.
So much like the wolf, a reintroduction of the wolf.
Yes.
Yellowstone.
Cougars are a keystone species. It's usually the big ones that are extincted first.
Yeah. So Corey, maybe we have a short little video that illustrates the reintroduction of the jaguars. So Kris, do we know how those jaguars are currently doing?
We do. There are now 6 of them out, about to be 7, and they're all doing really well. I was just thinking about that as I was sitting here watching. It's very hard for me not to tear up when I look at this, because this took us 10 years to realize, and they were just released on January 6th, coming up on 1 year.
So you mentioned that you always ask the question, who's missing? And I couldn't help but think that, in about 6 years ago, the love of your life, your partner in this extraordinary work, Doug, I was incredibly saddened when I learned of the tragic accident that he had in a kayaking accident on a large lake in Chile. And he passed away. He died from hypothermia. And at the time, or shortly thereafter, I think you said something to the effect that Doug's death, the impact that had on you was mighty from the day he died forward. But you said the rest was boot camp. So just how has his death impacted you in your and the work, subsequent to Doug's passing?
Well, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it probably saved my life. I mean, I didn't have a choice. And that was probably the perfect antidote for a tomahawk to the center of your forehead. It was really an amputation. We were inseparable. So yes, I think having to pivot and get all this stuff done, get all the parks donated and everything that we did not so long after he died, it was probably the one thing that pulled me out of the swamp.
Thank you for sharing that. Corey, there's one last image. I want to bring it up and then we'll move to questions because we've got some great questions. So this picture, Kris, you can locate us in time. It was a few years after Doug's death, and it's a picture of you beside the Chilean president at the time, Michelle Bachelet. Is that how you pronounce it?
Bachelet.
Can you just talk about what this image signifies and how you were feeling in this moment?
Well, it was, as Doug would have said, it was a banner day. This was the signing with the president of what ended up being the largest donation of land in history to create 5 new national parks and enlarge 3 others at a size larger than Switzerland. And we did it in one deal. And the 1 million acres we donated was the last of the land that we had acquired for conservation. So this was a huge, this is a huge moment in my life, the team's life, Chile's life, everybody's life. This was historic. There'd never been anything like it. We donated a 1 million acres and leveraged an additional 10.7 million acres to it. And so, yeah, it was a big day.
It was a banner day.
It was a banner day.
And to, just to bookend your earlier commentary about the, sort of hostility that was directed at you and Doug in the early days, and, death threats and coming full circle to this moment in time must have just resonated in a very profound way for you. And just to emphasize, as far as I know, what you've done is the largest act of private conservation philanthropy, in history. It's extraordinary.
Thank you.
Just extraordinary. So we have some great questions here I want to draw from, and people should feel free to add in. So the first question, what do you think would have happened to the land you conserved had you not conserved it? If you and Doug had not moved down to Chile.
It really varies. I'll try to answer that as quickly as possible. In terms of Pumalín, a lot of that, it was primal, pristine, temperate rainforest. And a lot of it would have been cut. Not all of it, because some of it's steep, but the parts that could legally be cut would be clear cut. In the case of Patagonia National Park, as you could see in some of the photographs, that was an estancia that had been running livestock for just under 100 years, completely decimated. So the waters in Iberá were being siphoned off for rice and all sorts of other productive reasons. So some of it would have been fine, a fraction of it. But the big strokes of any place we've been working would have increased the decimation of what has happened biologically. And really so much of what we do is restore these places. And in terms of Patagonia grasslands, when you're thinking about 600,000 acres of grasslands, the Patagonia National Park, really the restoration begins, you just take the sheep off and the cattle off, and Mother Nature has to decide what's going to come back and what's not going to come back. So sometimes there's tremendous intervention on our part to restore an area, and sometimes for obvious reasons, you just have to mitigate the pressure on that system and then just get out of the way and see what happens.
So there's a couple of other questions here I really want to get to. So the first is from Ethan Smith, actually an old colleague of mine.
Hi, Ethan.
And also Ethan, by the way, is a tremendous whitewater paddler. I can say that with great assurance. He says, so special to hear this story, Kristine. You mentioned some of the opposition you faced as you were creating these parks. What are one or two groups and or individuals along the way who were critical to your success?
Well, in some cases, because the president of Chile at the time was very much against conservation projects, the U.S. I think it was probably Al Gore and the U.S. ambassador to Chile really had to step in once in a while and say, look, these guys are U.S. citizens, so just be mindful of that. But no, we had a lot of support from individual Chileans who understood, who had spent a lot of time in the U.S. They understood the U.S. national park concept and so on. But I really want to remind people it was only the first 4 or 5 years that were really rough, and that was under one particular president. The day the president left office and the new president came in, Ricardo Lagos, everything changed. So it was a combination of social, cultural, political factors that, as I said earlier, those headwinds were always going to hit us. We just didn't know it at the time. We weren't prepared for it.
So Mike Gaffney wants to know, Indigenous people have been conserving, protecting, utilizing landscapes since forever.
Thousands of years, thousands and thousands.
How is your work informed by traditional ecological knowledge? How are Indigenous and or local people involved?
Well, in Chile, with the exception of the Mapuche, who are really found in central Chile, there has been, they're very active, and you can read a lot about them, and they have a lot to say, and they're very good at articulating what's happened to them, which of course we know is a pretty common story. Down in Pumalín, that area was never an Indigenous area because the weather is so bad that nobody lived along that coastline, really. They may have stopped off from time to time, but there was never a settlements of Tehuelche people and so on. It really varies. Down in Magallanes, and down by the Straits of Magellan, you have a really and becoming more so every year, a rich rebirth of indigenous cultures, the Kaweshkar, Yaganes, and that we have one of the areas that was part of what we asked the government to protect was the Kaweshkar archipelago off the Pacific coast of Chile. And anything that we do has to go through, if there are indigenous communities in those areas, we don't manage these conversations. The government, the national government steps in, and it's a very formal process. We can't donate land or a project to the national government without the consultation and an agreement of the indigenous peoples of that particular area. So, you know, things are changing very quickly about conservation and issues of indigenous rights and so on. Everything. Anyway, I guess I'm just babbling. That's all I have to say. But it's very interesting, and we're working on a park now for down in an area that is specific to one of those indigenous cultures, because they have never really had a chance to solidify their areas in, you know, 150 years.
So one last question. I'm sort of astonished when I read this question that came in from Meredith Delich. Astonished in that we've been talking for 30 minutes and climate change has not come up. So I want to ask Meredith's question on her behalf. How do you, or did you, think about the impact of climate change in the selection of conservation sites?
I mean, to be really honest, in some cases, there is climate mitigation in terms of species being able to exist at a higher altitude, or the reverse, go down into valleys that perhaps that they weren't having access to before. But basically, in the case of Pumalín, is 1 million acres of pristine temperate rainforest. We consider that a contribution toward climate mitigation. Grasslands, even though we never really think about them as being big contributors toward climate, but now thankfully it turns out that they have quite an impact. Obviously, peat, where we work, there are peat bogs and these wetlands. They all contribute, but we never specifically went after a particular project specifically to combat climate change. And it's not that we didn't think about it, but there's no project that we've had that was specifically sought after just to that end.
So, Kris, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. And by way of thanks, I wanted to share 2 quotes with you and our audience. And I just felt this was fitting for a variety of reasons. One is a quote that I came across from Doug, and the other is a quote that I came across of yours. So I want to quote you to yourself. So by way of thanks, the first quote goes as follows: "We conceive of progress as going in a certain direction, forward. But what is forward? If we're walking toward an abyss and reach the edge, well, we stop. If we take another step forward, we'll fall into the abyss and die. But if we turn 180 degrees and take another step forward, where are we going? We're not going back to the past. We're walking towards the future." And the second quote, and I'm quoting you to you: "Whoever you are, wherever your interest lies, Whatever you've fallen in love with, get out of bed every morning and do something. Act, step into the fray, fight for a human society in balance with the natural world. So thank you, Kris. It's been an incredibly honor and pleasure to talk with you this evening. I really, really appreciate you doing this on behalf of NatureBridge.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everybody. And see you when you all get out of bed tomorrow morning. Let's meet on the corner and go fight for something.
Great. And so I'd like to welcome Phil back. He's going to close the evening for us. Thanks again, Kris. Phil?
Great. Huge thanks, Ian, and huge thanks, Kris. And how wonderful to be quoted to yourself. I mean, that's a pretty, you've made it, Kris. Not that you needed this campfire chat to assure yourself of that, but Kris, thank you for inspiring us all.
It's a delight, really.
So friends, we would just like to close tonight's campfire chat. We do want to hear your thoughts about the whole campfire chat series. So we will be sending out a survey. Look for that in your email and help us improve these for the future. We are also grateful to each and every one of you for your support. The time between Thanksgiving and the New Year is a great time for generosity. We'd love to invite you to make a gift to NatureBridge following tonight's chat. There is a link here going into the chat window. We will send you a token of our appreciation from the NatureBridge store in gratitude for your contribution. Huge thanks to all of you for all of the support that you give to NatureBridge day in, day out, for all the students that you help us serve in Yosemite, Olympic National Park, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, Prince William Forest, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and beyond. And we wish you all the happiest of holidays. Thank you very much for joining us.